Hey guys, today I want to talk about an old topic, a common topic within Turkey, but I feel like a lot of people are still discussing this with like a 2000s mindsets. So 20 years back in time, 25 years back in time, where there were only secular Turks. Then you also had the religious Turks, and at the bottom you had basically the religious or socialist Kurds, right? So in Turkey, there are changing social dynamics, and in one of my previous videos, I mentioned that secular Turks are basically on top. And there are more variables that I have to mention here because it's a combination of class, your phenotype, your family background, your ethnicity, and also your cultural stance or your religious stance, I should say. For example, if you're like let's say a secular person that lives in is in a small town, obviously you're inferior to like a religious person who is upper middle class or upper class in Istanbul and so forth, right? So now obviously there are still stereotypes within Turkey. The fact that Turkish religious people tend to be like more lower class. Secular people they tend to be like living more in the big cities, tend to be like middle or upper class. But these social dynamics are actually kind of changing, and there are more variables that come into play that I wanted to talk about. So, for example, the reason why, and this is like a bit of a black pill, and people might get triggered when I say this, is that when it comes to like secular Turks, one of the reasons that they are considered more superior within Turkey is because obviously they are more European, and this more European identity is obviously both social and related to your phenotype. For example, I used to have a Turkish friend, and she was like a Balkan girl, extremely pale skinned, quite tall. She looked like almost like a typical Western European girl. And she actually like co-admined the Facebook page with me. And I remember like she used to be joining those Discord calls as well, and she used to like engage in like these political discussions and so forth. And she used to send me like screenshots of Turkish guys who are very nationalistic, uh, how hard they were simping for her, how hard they, and not only just simping for her, they were like basically denigrating other Turkish women for being like looking like zombies. And the reason why they say it sets like use the word zombies is because they're obviously more tanned, more brown skinned, and so forth. Because whether you like it or not, for a lot of Turks, being whiter of skin color, and this is like a black belt that nobody wants to discuss, but the whiter your skin is, or the more European features you have, phenotype wise, the more superior you are perceived. You see this on Turkish television as well, and it can blackball you more with other friends. Like I used to have like a Georgian friend, like ethnically Georgian, but Turkish citizen, and she used to have like she still has obviously green eyes, and she has this very European looking phenotype. And at one point on her birthday, a Turkish businessman from Istanbul basically sent her like a gift of, basically sent her like $1,000 in cash. And I asked like, were you like, obviously were you like sexting or something like that? Did you basically provide him with anything in return? And she said like basically no. And now you might say like obviously she's going to say no, but no, she's actually kind of like liberal, so she would have told me. But yeah, that's the way that's the difference that in treatment you get when you're kind of like European in Turkey. So when I mentioned like secular Turks are like on the top of the food chain, there is like a caveat to that, especially in you know 2025, is that obviously if you're European in Turkey, you are basically perceived a little bit higher, be it a man, be it a woman. I can talk about male friends as well, who often like I've seen how differently they are treated. They're almost like I wouldn't say like as a white guy in India, but it's not getting. You can imagine the situation, right? So The topic of today is like this inferiority complex that I wanted to talk about. When I say like inferiority complex, I'm not saying like this is like an exclusively secular Turkish problem, or it doesn't exist with the more Islamic segments of Turkish society. But there is actually like obviously with the with the secular side, and I don't want to generalize secular Turks, because you have like the diehard Kemalists, you have like the secular normies, then you also have the more socialist, anti-imperialist ones, and they will always like it's very difficult for to basically distinguish them, because they will all for example they will all claim that they are Republicans, like they are for the Republic. So it's very difficult to distinguish all these groups, but there are a lot of different secular people, secular people in Turkey. But you can basically at least acknowledge that within the secular segments of Turkish society, this inferiority complex towards Europeans is a bit higher than uh, the Islamic segments of Turkish society. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist within the Islamic segment, because when you look at much more religious societies than Turkey, such as Arabs, even a lot of Arabs who are much more religious, they also have like this inferiority complex towards Europeans, right? Like when we look at the Gulf states, they will basically just hire white people for the sake of them being white, essentially. We have a lot of these Muslim converts. You see this in Muslim conversions as well. Like whenever there is a group of white people converting to Islam, then it's suddenly seen as like, whoa, white people are converting, so it must mean that we are certainly on the right side, right? Like we are going to win. Whereas, like, imagine a bunch of Indians or Africans converting to Islam, then suddenly it's like, yeah, who cares, right? Like they're just coping. Yeah, this inferiority complex towards Westerners does exist in Turkey. There is a social and racial element to it. And sometimes people tend to be like, oh, yeah, just completely denying it. It doesn't exist, or it is incredibly minimized. But again, like I've mentioned two examples before, but there are a lot of more examples that I can mention. Like sometimes some Europeans even have like this fucking career, this social media career, where they just their life, their life is basically being a white person that rates or gives reviews, or gives their opinion on Turkish food or Turkish politics or Turkish songs or something like that. Like imagine that your skin color is so valuable, so powerful, that basically your opinion is so valued that you can basically make a social media career out of it. You can basically become an influencer. Like it's kind of wild, like that's the amount of inferiority complex there is. Like imagine you're a Turkish person, you basically have to essentially work or slave your life away, while some person can review, like a white person can review your food and or your cities and basically become rich out of it, right? So it is in an immense privilege. Just to be clear, yeah, okay, fine, we might argue that this inferiority complex is kind of ridiculous, but pushing back on it by saying that all human beings are equal or should be treated equally, or saying that this inferiority complex is ridiculous because all of these white people, they will never accept you, kind of denies or ignores the human realities of things. Because let me put it this way, okay? For a lot of these people, be it Turks or brown people in general, let's say that you have the Western, the West essentially as a civilization. For these people, let's say that the West is like a ship or a villa or something like that, being a dog in this civilization is superior than being a homeowner in an Islamic civilization. Because let's say, like, and this is like a bit of a crude comparison that I'm going to make, is that in Turkey there is always like this joke that a lot of people, they cannot eat red meat. Like this is not only true in Turkey, but all over the Middle East. A lot of Middle Eastern people, because of poverty, because of bad state management, they just can't eat or afford to eat red meat on a regular basis. So one of the comparisons that I made is that who eats or consumes more red meat in total per year, let's say? A dog, like a pet animal in the Netherlands, or a Turkish citizen? And this is like a quite of a crude comparison, but yeah, this kind of shows that, based off red meat consumption, you're better off being a dog in the Netherlands than being a Turkish person in Turkey. Another example that that an Egyptian friend gave me, and Egypt obviously is like a much poorer country than Turkey, where the suffering is like, exponentially higher. Being a minister in Turkey or being a toilet cleaner, janitor in Switzerland, who has access to, higher quality of breathing air? Obviously, the janitor in Switzerland, right? Because of all the pollution that there is in in Egypt and Cairo. So that's the type of material inferiority that a lot of Middle Eastern people are, suffering from. Naturally, a lot of people, based off their animalistic instincts, who were born in Turkey or grew up in Turkey, they are going to be like, listen, bro, it doesn't matter for me. Like, I'd rather be a dog in the West than be like an actual human being in the East. And I, I believe that from like an Islamic perspective, you can't really judge them against this, because when we see like the suffering that a lot of people experience, and I'm not actually against suffering, but like some of the suffering is unnecessary and un-Islamic as well. Like the inflation, the high tax rates, and so forth. So these things are extremely unnecessary, and obviously, as a result of this repression, of this unnecessary suffering, these people are going to be like, fuck it. I'd rather be like going to like, jump this ship and go to the West and be a dog there. It doesn't matter. Like, I will forsake all my identity, all my principles, and to basically argue like, oh yeah, this is like a bad thing or something like that, is actually very inhumane, and it kind of denies our animalistic instincts, which is also like kind of wrong, because a lot of people, we have this animalistic urge for power, right? Like, we want to rise, we want to grow, because growing makes us happy. And if the East, Islamic civilization in general, cannot provide that, then obviously there is going to be this inferiority complex, and this inferiority complex will continue to grow. What is necessary here is that the East has basically, or Turkey in general, has to not instantly become rich even or powerful, but it at least has to provide its own citizens, its own people, with like an ability to grow, and an ability to rise to the top. Because unless we do that, there is no way that we can get rid of this inferiority complex. And we say this inferiority complex, by the way, with the Westerners as well. So this inferiority complex, we see this with the Westerners as well, because a lot of human beings, they are just jumping from one pyramid to the other pyramid, right? Like, because again, we have this animalistic urge to grow. So one day I was working in my factory in Belgium, and there was this new Flemish guy that I had to provide him with some training on the job. And he looked like a very skinhead looking guy, like shaved head, reddish face, very muscular, filled with tattoos, like all over his bodies. There were tattoos, and I was like, huh, like kind of confused. Like he's like between all these Muslim brown migrants working, and he looks like a straight up skinhead. So I started to talk with him, and I noticed instantly, like, bro, you, because the way that he talked like Flemish was almost like he talked like Flemish as like those Muslim migrants, right? And I said like, jokingly to him like, "Are you actually like even Flemish?" And he said like, "Yeah, 100%." And I was like, "Why do you talk like those Muslim migrants?" Or something like that. And he said he basically came closer to me and whispered in my ears that he also converted to Islam. Now this is like one of the stories that I can mention is that and I can mention more stories about this, but even when we look at Western migrants, like, excuse me, Western converts uh, in Europe, maybe in North America as well, all of these people tend to be, and some Muslims get annoyed by this, but they tend to be like lower class people, like the ginger stereotype is obviously often mentioned. So a lot of these Western migrants, Western converts, they are at the lowest barrel of their society. Like, imagine you have a Islamic civilization and you have a Western civilization. The people at the bottom are obviously going to seek. They're either going to do two things, right? Like, they're either going to cope with some kind of a national, true nationalism, or uh, loyalty to their ancestors, loyalty to their religion, or something like that. They're basically going to cope and stay loyal within this pyramid, within this hierarchy, or if those ideas of the if those coping mechanisms get weakened, get softened, they are going to basically look at it from like an animalistic perspective, and they are going to be like, listen, there is this Islamic hierarchy and there is this Western hierarchy. And I'm basically just going to choose which hierarchy is going to allow me to grow faster, according to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And a lot of Easterners, Turks, Middle Easterners, brown people, and so forth, when they move to Europe or to the West, or they try to be, very European and so forth, what they're essentially doing is basically switching pyramids. And a lot of people might say, again, a lot of people might consider this to be unprincipled. They might say, like, oh, this is bad, this is, stick up for your beliefs and so forth. But again, this is denying uh, this is denying our animalistic urges within us.